Welcome to the Low Wage Essential Work and Immigrant Workers track. My name is Kelly Nevins. I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. And I just wanted to give some real brief bios of the wonderful panelists that we have with us today. So this track is going to talk about how women, and particularly women of color, disproportionately hold jobs in industries that pay minimum and low wages with little benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit about the big picture and then move into breakout rooms where we can go into more detail, more deeply with some of our panelists and just have more general discussion. So that will happen a little bit later in the session. But it is my pleasure today to introduce Eva Millona, who is the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. She's also co-chair and board president of the National Partnership for New Americans. She's a leading advocate for immigrants and refugees. And so we're very happy to have her with us today. In addition, we have Rachel Flum, who is the executive director of the Rhode Island Economic Progress Institute, formerly the Poverty Institute, which is a nonpartisan research and policy organization dedicated to improving the economic well-being of low and modest income Rhode Islanders. Thirdly, we have Georgia Hollister Isman, who was introduced a little bit earlier with an older title. She actually is the New England Regional Director for Working Families Party, and she's a skilled coalition builder, successful in building consensus around goals and tactics and creating strategies with broad buy-in from diverse communities, and works a lot on the issues that we'll be talking about today. And then last but not least, I'd like to introduce Kiah Morris, who is a movement politics director for the Rights and Democracy Project, responsible for co-creating and building the movement-centered governing infrastructure that shifts power into the hands of people, especially marginalized community members at every level of government. And we are so pleased to have them here today. Kiah is going to moderate the discussion. We will then move into breakout rooms after about a half an hour of discussion for maybe about 15 minutes or so of small group talk about more deeply some of the issues brought up by our speakers. And so without further ado, Kiah, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for the welcome and for your participation in today's session. So as previously mentioned, my name is Kiah Morris, and I'm the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy Vermont. I'm also hold the distinction and honor of having had the opportunity to serve within the Vermont State Legislature as the second African-American woman to have done so in state history. What's important about that story, and the reason why I begin with that particular narrative, is that it's important to know that I ran for office as a low-wage worker. I ran for office at a time when I didn't even know if I was going to still have employment because they were laying off multiple positions within the healthcare system that I worked. I was coming from a background of having struggled, having been on social services, having lived in public housing. All of these things informed who I am. They all informed how I tried to push for and advocate for policy. And they 100% absolutely informed the ways that we tried to bring the narratives, the stories, and the experiences of those who are low-wage workers, those who are most impacted and from our marginalized populations, into those decision-making spaces. Why this conversation is so deeply important at this exact moment in time. So the things that I'm going to say to you, you know, deep in your bones. We've had deep discussions about this. This is the second day of a whole day of considering what is life like for women in New England and how are we going to improve that exponentially so that we can be full participants in the ways that we need to, want to, deserve to, and the ways that are most healing from the many generational harms and modes of oppressions that have placed us in these very dire circumstances that we're constantly trying to mitigate. So we know well that the wage gap and that wealth gap between genders is well documented, and it's only exacerbated in these deeply challenging times. COVID has shown the fragility of our social safety nets and the urgency that's needed to address economic inequality, gender-based violence, and healthcare disparities. Now, first, the crisis has battered industry sectors in which women's employment is more concentrated. We're looking at restaurants and other retail establishments, hospitality, healthcare, even childcare. The relief packages that have come out were but pennies coming from the federal government. And so each state had to create their own pathway to trying to create a sense of wholeness. And yet we still saw images, and they're burned in our minds, of folks that are in their cars for hours at times waiting to pick up military rations. Our mutual aid networks have exploded with requests for free meals and as many food support systems as can be attained at any given point in time. We know that because of this right now, we're finding that 1 in 3 mothers have considered leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers because of COVID-19. If we were to think about those who are married, amongst married couples, 44% of couples with children, both of those spouses are working full time in most of our New England states. And amongst these couples, mothers provide overwhelmingly the majority of the childcare. So thinking about how this looks and feels, it makes us remind ourselves that there was always a childcare crisis pre-COVID. And it's only redoubled in its severity as health restrictions have limited occupancies and have also created staff reductions within the industry itself. So I consider the story of a woman that I met when I was on the campaign trail, who had moved to Vermont and was a mother to a young child. This mother wanted to return to the workforce and create greater financial stability for herself and her family. And so she sought work in the retail industry, where she had quite a deal of experience. She actually had enough experience and qualifications within management to be considered on a store or district level manager level. But she was unable to accept any of the job offers that she actually applied for because she was unable to find childcare. It was only after she ended up linking up with a local Head Start center that I was on the board of directors with, that she was able to come on as a substitute teacher and find both work and the childcare that she needed to be a part of this workforce. Now, this was an opportunity that is not really available, nor is it scalable, right, for the majority of women in our community. But considering again that she was qualified to work on a store or district level manager level, in this instance, she had to take a reduction in pay just to be able to work, to create both an income and to have those childcare needs met. Now, this is part of what I consider an unacceptable exchange that women are forced to navigate in order to work and to thrive in any meaningful way within an inequality system and an inequality within our economic landscape. I apologize. I'm super tired. Because COVID is also requiring for us to be parents and teachers and supporting our community members and doing other forms of care. It's requiring for us to put in long hours, far beyond what we normally would, because there's an efficiency model that we continually drive towards. And there is an urgency that comes with the white supremacy culture that we are all embedded in. So I appreciate your grace as I make my way through these comments and as we go through today's events. Now, I want to also raise up the fact that for undocumented women, many of the minimal services that they are needed are actually wholly unavailable already without a pandemic. Accessing services requires an ability to place much more at risk those family structures and their very presence in order to even be present to be able to access those services. The opportunities for additional exploitation as well through unpaid labor and coercion are also very real. Ultimately, those who are unable to access meaningful employment will be left behind and potentially unable to overcome the crushing weight of poverty. So this session is focused on low-wage workers, and we can often think of those who have the greatest need for social services, but I also encourage you to consider those that are classified through our deeply faulty poverty formulas that do not consider what a true living wage should actually provide. So there's those that might be considered to be lower or middle class according to our economic stratifications who can barely make ends meet as well. So this is a deep reality for those who do not have paid family and medical leave to care for themselves or a loved one in the midst of a pandemic. This is a deep reality for those who may support far beyond a nuclear family and are caring for multiple generations under one roof. And this is a deep reality for those who are small business owners that have not yet reached a full profitability and are just as much at risk of losing it all. And we would be remiss if we did not consider as well what that means for a benefits cliff that punishes low-wage workers for the small gains that they receive in their lives. I also considered the story of a single mom who was a nursing assistant who had an opportunity to gain full-time employment at a state nursing facility, but did not pursue it because the math between the benefits that she received to care for her 3 children, the modest increase in income that she might gain, and the new out-of-pocket costs that she would have to incur as those services were taken away made it completely unreasonable. The pains of poverty hurt at the soul. And this is something that I've said in many speeches. It's a topic of poetry that I've written. This is something that we feel, again, in our bones. And the mental and the spiritual, physical cost of carrying these burdens, it often limits the ability for impacted women to be able to be fully present in many of the roles that we're expected to play. So today, I'm so excited to be able to bring to this conversation our incredible speakers, Eva Millona, Rachel Flume, and Georgia from the Rhode Island Working Families Institute. And I'm so excited to be able to have everyone come be a part of this conversation and would love to be able to begin. Eva, if you'd be able to join us here on the call, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your work. And I definitely have some questions I'd love to ask you about that fantastic work that you're doing.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Eva.
So much. Thank you so much for your amazing words and the amazing work that you do. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with this amazing panel and all of you. First, I just want to say thank you for the incredible work that you do. We are in this together, and I'm so looking forward to the conversation. So I just wanted to, for many of you who know Mira, we are the largest advocacy organization in New England that have been in the front lines for 33 years, supporting immigrant rights and immigrant and refugee integration. We've heard during the conference that immigrant families have been significantly impacted by COVID-19, including women. And with disproportionately high rates of infection, jobs loss, and food and housing insecurity among immigrant and refugee communities, there has been no aspect of our work that has left untouched by this crisis. We started at disadvantage. In the last 4 years, immigrant communities have been so in a very difficult situation, starting at a disadvantage, also with the drastic policies that were implemented by the current administrations. You are aware of 400 regulatory changes that happen in immigration that have affected drastically immigrant families. And plus, we had the crisis of COVID-19. Last August, we at MIRA conducted a statewide survey in 16 languages. We had about 433 immigrant households across Massachusetts that responded. And what we found, overall, immigrant households have experienced high rates of unemployment. 76% surveyed experienced at least one job loss for their household. And with unemployment comes food insecurity and housing insecurity. So we saw that reflected in our survey results. 2 in 5 immigrant households reported some form of housing insecurity. And 59% of immigrant households reported food insecurity. A lack of access to quality, affordable childcare also has exacerbated these negative effects. 70% of the household with small children reported having no access to childcare, and 15% reported having to leave a job for a lack of childcare. These findings are devastating, but the outcomes are even worse for immigrant and refugee women. According to the Migration Policy Institute of 2018, there were more than 11.9 million immigrant women workers in the United States. Immigrant women are our educators, our healthcare workers, our food service workers, and our hospitality workers, our frontline workers. 23% of the essential workers are immigrants, and many are women and mothers. As an immigrant mother myself, I can tell you this firsthand. Immigrant women are the backbone of our economy and our communities. And when we leave the workforce, our economy and our communities suffer. That's exactly what we've seen during COVID-19 crisis. As a preliminary analysis of the COVID-19 economic impacts conducted by the Migration Institute found that even though working age immigrant women in the United States had similar unemployment rates to other groups prior to the pandemic, they have been among the most affected by pandemic job-related losses. Their unemployment rates peaked at 18.5% as of September 2020, was at 11.2%. These rates are higher than the rates for immigrant men and US-born men and women. It is also unfortunate but unsurprising that these impacts vary further when you consider race, education level, socioeconomic status, and other factors. A recent Washington Post analysis concluded that Hispanic and Black workers, mothers of all races workers without a college diploma, and low-wage earners have all been hit particularly hard by COVID-19 related jobs losses and have seen a slower recovery than the average US worker. There are several potential reasons for this disproportionate impact. One may be that many immigrant women play a dual role as parents, but also as workers. Our survey found childcare is not easily accessible. And when schools switched to remote learning, many parents, primarily women, had to make the difficult decisions to leave their jobs to take care of their children. Also, immigrant women are more likely to work in leisure and hospitality occupations as wait staff or food service managers, maids or housekeepers. These occupations have been more severely impacted by job cuts. Many jobs also don't provide paid sick leave, which leaves immigrant women with the impossible decision of earning their paycheck or caring for themselves or a sick loved one. These job losses are devastating, not only to the worker, but to the families, their community, and the entire economy. They mean reduced income, increased poverty, and increased food and housing insecurity. They can also contribute to skills atrophy and lower lifetime earnings for immigrant women. So what can we do, and what are some of the policy implications? At the state level, the employment and training budget line item, it's a priority for MIRA, and we've been working for that for years. The domestic violence line item, supporting women who are in difficult conditions and domestic violence victims. Also, the sick leave law needs to be strengthened. The Safe Communities Act, it's another important piece of legislation pending at the state level, and one of the sponsor, Representative Liz Miranda, it's part of this conference as well, that provides safety for women to call 911 or access services and not being afraid of being deported. And the legislature has still a few more weeks to get this legislation done. Also, at the federal level, Congress needs to pass another stimulus package that includes relief for all families. Congress also must prioritize expanding access to affordable childcare. Massachusetts' own Representative Catherine Clark has proposed a bill that calls for $10 billion investment over 5 years in our nation's childcare infrastructure. Among the provisions, investment in our childcare industry will also benefit many immigrant women who work in the field. Our Senator Warren has introduced similar legislation on the Senate as well. And also at the state level, the state must prioritize reopening in-person learning as soon as it's safe to do so. This means taking all the necessary measures to control community spread. And I know that we cannot do this work alone. If you do it alone, you don't do enough. So we are in this together, and I really want to take advantage of this opportunity to invite you to work together on the agenda for all women, including immigrant women. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. So, so powerful, and bringing in the considerations around housing insecurity, the just sheer number of folks that are facing potential houselessness and evictions. That relief is going to be so necessary for us to really make sure that's built into anything that we're doing. And these are all smart concepts, right? That aren't just in response to an immediate moment, but they're things that we need on a long range basis. We want to consider things like universal basic income. That's essentially what we're doing here with these COVID relief packages, right? And we see how much of a difference that it makes, and we need to actually make the social safety nets actually have something underneath them. So thank you so much for that, Eva. That was really helpful and wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing. So next, I would love to invite and welcome Rachel Flume, who's the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. Rachel, can you join us? I'd love to learn more about your work as well.
Thank you, Kiah, for having me here. And I'm so pleased to be on this panel with Eva and Georgia. I also want to acknowledge and say how pleased I am to be part of this larger conversation today. Representative Presley was very inspiring, as well as our own Rhode Island Rep, Anastasia Williams. And I see Senator Valverde, Representative Kassar, and Representative Tanzi, who are often making good trouble with us here in Rhode Island. So thank you all for being part of this call today. I will just say briefly, I'm not going to be as eloquent as Eva was in a presentation, but our work is centered, we're a research and advocacy organization, and we're a small group. We have a staff of 6 full-time folks, but we really believe it's important to work in coalition with a number of folks on this call to move a policy agenda forward. But when COVID hit, we shifted quickly to be a facilitator of education out about programs that could support either immigrants, other individuals who are trying to figure out what the paid sick and paid leave policies are. Rhode Island has strong paid sick and paid leave policies, but it's very confusing for folks on how they interact with the national policies. And so we tried to do some education pieces out around how to make sure that people could just support themselves in this time of crisis. And as it's gone on further, we have shifted to try to encourage the state to make sound policy decisions as they complete their state budget, so that we can find ourselves in a place of coming out of this recession with harming as few people as possible. So learning from the last recession, making thoughtful tax policy considerations, investments in the communities that we all care about and think are important, because we know that investing in those most marginalized communities means that our community as a whole will be successful in the long run. So I'm happy to get into more of the details as our conversation goes on, but that's sort of an overview of what we're working on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. Such great work. Really wonderful. I'd love to also welcome into our community, Georgia Hollister Isman, who is the New England Regional Director for Working Families. Georgia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, and really delighted to see names and faces on the screen of folks I've worked with before and who I haven't worked with, but whose work I admire. So thanks for having me. So Working Families Party approaches this work. We do a lot of political work in addition to the policy work that we do. And so we think a lot about what are the sort of necessary conditions for all of these smart ideas to become reality. I often sort of say our mission is to make the priorities of working men and women, they're actually the priorities of the state government, which they usually are not, right? Like, so it's a big shift. And I want to just highlight a couple of things. One, we haven't said this, but these ideas that we're talking about in terms of support for folks' ability to access childcare, support for higher wages, support for higher taxes on wealthier taxpayers to fund all of those things, support for healthcare for those who need it, support for housing. Those are popular ideas with people. I think we sometimes like talk about them as if they're just like smart policy ideas, but there is real concrete demand when people sort of like think about what do they want from their government. This is the stuff that they think about, right? This is, people actually have a sense that state government should be providing these kinds of universal safety nets for people. And especially now, I think the other thing that we think about a lot is like, how do the conditions, like the real need, the things that are going on in the real world affect how people think about this stuff? So it's been a really fascinating time for us to watch the real needs explode. And it's not just, I think it's very important that this pandemic is not just that everyone is struggling, and it's not just that like low income people are struggling. And it's not just that poor people and people of color are disproportionately impacted. All of those things are true. The other thing that's true is that wealthy people are doing quite well, right? Like if you look at the stock market, you would not imagine that we are in a real economic crisis here. So we, unlike other recessions where we've seen everybody take a hit and it's far more devastating for some people than for others, we've seen this like extra divergence and like kind of like hyper inequality. We've always had significant, devastating inequality in our economy and our communities, and it is both worse now, but also more visible to people. I think that's the other thing that we've been thinking a lot about at Working Families Party is like, how are people's consciousness shifting, and how does that mean that they are open to and willing to demand different things than they would have before? And I want to highlight one piece of this work that we did nationally with Working Families Party. Is we set out at the beginning of the pandemic to sort of think about this, like how is the common sense about what government should be doing shifting in this moment? And we did this process we call the People's Charter, and it included lots of conversations with smart people, but it also included a lot of like super nerdy polling and focus groups with voters of every color and every background across the country. And we came up with this framing for our values, which I'll put in the chat so you all can see it, but which is around care, around who cares for us, and what kind of care do we all owe each other, and what kind of care do we expect from our government. And this wasn't the only option of ways we could sort of talk about our values, but it was the one that made the most sense to people. And of course, I saw that and I'm like, oh, of course, this is the way, in my experience, this is the way women think about politics and government, or certainly the way, a way of thinking about it that is highlighted by having more women at the table. So to me, this document is powerful, both because it states strongly what we want in the world, but also does it in a way that feels really authentic to me as a woman doing this work, in a way that some of the other ways we've talked about demands in the past have not. So there you have the People's Charter. Would love to have folks sign on to it. We had a launch of it in October with Representative Presley, who you saw today, and others speaking to it. But I think this is how we're thinking about the world, that this is a moment to be very clear about the world that we envision and the world that we want, but also very precise about like, what is the thing that we think we can get, and not forget that actually in this moment, people are on our side. And maybe more so, and seeing things more clearly than they have in the past. And I just, want to, Rachel acknowledged them by name, but want to just say that lots of these things are much more possible in Rhode Island, where I've done a bunch of work, and also in Massachusetts and Connecticut and other places, because of the just phenomenal women who have been elected to the State House in the last couple of years. And as Kiah said so eloquently in the beginning, bringing a real diversity of experience, of lived experience, right? Like, you don't worry that someone who has made minimum wage is gonna like forget when they're in the committee room what that experience was like and what that meant. So I think, you know, that matters significantly, and we're seeing it matter in terms of what the, like, you know, and they're still they're still all white men, but you know, what the leadership in these places is talking about. They're sort of responding to those changes, and like considering things that weren't even on the table before. So I think that's promising. And then of course the devil's in the details, right? Like, how do we, and that requires strong advocates, and many of them will be these women who've recently been elected in the room, fighting for that. So I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you so much. There's so many thoughts that come to mind, and I appreciate that you're lifting up the fact that these are demands that are coming from the people. So you can walk in some strength. You can carry that. And I apologize. I'm using ableist language, and I'm trying to unpack that, right? But one of the things to keep in mind is that this is something that everyone has felt, and hopefully, as we said, we won't suddenly have a reduction of consciousness around what these experiences were like for people to feel that tension of so much being so delicate at these points in times. One of the other things that I think we should also just bring into this conversation is the invisibility of our disability community. And so recognizing that the intersectionality of women's experiences, the many different identities that we carry, all compound to create sometimes an untenable situation for individuals to lift themselves from. Those within the disability community have known about the failures of our social safety nets all along. And so their inability to get access to the healthcare that they needed, to get access to food, access to transportation, to live in the ways that we are expecting for people that are part of our working culture to do so, has always been there. And it does actually also raise the question, as we're all hearing these talks about vaccines for COVID, right? What is that going to mean for our low-wage workers as we're going to have to step back into the workforce again, when we don't know whether or not the pandemic has been resolved, whether or not COVID has been finally abated? These are the things that we're going to feel that urgency around, and we're going to want to be thinking creatively, innovatively, and boldly to try to resolve. So I also love the concept of thinking about the world as we most want it to be, and that's where we have to really take some radical approaches. So thank you for all of that. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask a few questions, if I may, to each of our panelists. I'll let you popcorn up as to when you feel ready to speak on it. These are some questions that I think will help us again to frame out what we'll want to do in the breakout rooms as we're trying to brainstorm solutions towards a better future. So given that women, and particularly women who identify as BIPOC or members of the global majority, are disproportionately being forced out of paid work in this moment, what is the anticipated impact on our communities if nothing is done? Can I call on anyone to join in on that?
So I'm happy to start. You know, I think there are a couple of things. We have done a lot of research around, even before the pandemic, about who is most impacted or more likely to be living in poverty. And so we certainly know that, unfortunately, Latina and Black women are more likely, and certainly, you know, our youngest and our oldest members of those populations are most struggling even before the crisis. So if we think about BIPOC women losing their jobs, we know that they are often supporting multiple generations. So in Rhode Island, we already have 30% of Latina women over the age of 65 living in poverty. If you think about their daughters who may be the breadwinners for that family, you know, you worry even more about what that means for those generations. You know, but I really think it's also important to think about the support that those women are providing to their communities as a whole. I think a lot about caregivers and the caregiving economy. We know almost the vast majority of childcare providers and those who are taking care of our seniors, either in their homes or in nursing home settings, are women. So if you think about what happened during this crisis, where childcare centers were closed, either temporarily or some have ended up being permanent, that really has ripple effects for the whole economy and people being able to work and to do the things that they need. But also, I think it's important to think about not only the ripple effects that those women specifically have, but, you know, talking about, you know, how Wall Street is doing and how the rich among us are doing. You know, I think there's this notion that I would refer people to the Groundworks Collaborative if they're not familiar with their work, that the economy is Wall Street and the economy is how the stock market is doing. But in reality, we are all the economy. And so, you know, it's all of the millions of transactions that we all make with each other every day. And so if the most marginalized among us are not working and have had their often way too low incomes cut, you know, they are not spending money in their local markets. They are not able to buy those things that they normally would have been able to buy, which impacts not only their community, but first it impacts their small community, but then it ripples out into their whole state economy and then the nation. So, you know, we would really urge people to consider that as they think about, you know, how we fix these systems, and really try to focus on systems that both help lift the wages and ensure job security for our BIPOC women. You know, while we have good paid leave policies, they are not helping in all the ways that we need them to help, right? The moms who are trying to juggle the hybrid schools systems, right? I've got someone that we know who works for a bank. She has a secure job, but she's working from 6 in the morning till 10 in the morning, and then 2 in the afternoon till 6 in the afternoon. And in the meantime, teaching her children, right? And so that's not only unfair for her as a woman to have that extra burden, as Kiah mentioned, it sounds like she's doing as well, but also it's untenable in the long term in terms of her being able to be a good employee and productive member of society. So I'll leave it at that and let someone else speak.
Thank you, Rachel. Eva or Georgia?
I'll go next. Thank you. So we heard about the impact. So we tell the story about women, but we are talking today, but just getting that story at a PR level, at a campaign that talks about the role of women. We saw the impact of COVID. We hear the stories, but we portray women as a segment of the population that it's really suffering, that it's impacted severely, but we do not tell the story how powerful they are, how resilient they are, how resourceful they are. And I think that narrative needs to be told. I think we need to create really a multi-year, multi-sector campaign to talk about women and their role in our economy. Women, the backbone of our economy. We cannot talk about recovery. We cannot talk about economic prosperity. We cannot talk about economic equality if women, and also immigrant and refugee women, are not included. We have to talk about inclusiveness. We have to talk about women as part of the solution, not part of the problem. And in particular for immigrant women, I didn't have a chance when I was giving my remarks about the policy implications. Women being part of the workforce, and immigrant women, because of their status, cannot even drive. Massachusetts doesn't have a driver's license for everyone who is on the road and needs to drive. And I know that Dr. Tracy, Natalisa Tracy, is part of this conversation as well. And she's been leading the current campaign for driving families forward. And that is, you know, a practical, a very easy thing that needs to happen, a safety, but also something that we need to push and have the legislature get it done this way. How can people get to work? How these women can take their children to school or access healthcare? So there are certain things that can be done, are not difficult, But I think the way we do it, and the way we built a very strong PR campaign, a narrative about women as the backbone of our economy. It's one major thing that we need to talk about and think about and work together.
Thank you, Eva. Georgia?
I don't have a ton to add, but I just want to put a fine point on something that Rachel and Eva each mentioned a little bit, is the just essential to all of our lives, the work that is predominantly done by women of color, the caregiving work in our economy, childcare, home health aides, nursing home workers. These are the folks who are most at risk in this moment. Those jobs are scary right now, and they don't get paid very much. And so as a result, and if you also have childcare responsibilities at home, of course, thinking about dropping out of paid work makes sense. So unless we do our work to make those jobs safe, or as safe as possible, and most importantly, to make them well paid, like family sustaining wages. And we are a long way from that, although lots of people have been doing good work on it. We're gonna really struggle. And this is connected to the state budget conversation, right? Because childcare, certainly nursing home and home health work, lots of that is subsidized by the state through our healthcare policies and our childcare policies. So very important that we not only don't decrease, but increase the money we have available in those budgets for that. And we're only going to be able to do that if we take seriously this conversation about tax fairness and taxing the wealthy and the folks who are not impacted by this crisis. So if folks, and those jobs are what are growing. We're gonna need more and more of those people, more and more folks willing to do the work of, yeah, that cat is distracting. More and more people willing to do the work, and the close physical work of caring for children, caring for elders, caring for folks with disabilities. So just wanna put a fine point on how essential that work is to our economy and to our communities and to so many families, and how far we were even before this crisis from making it sustainable for folks to do. And now it's extra dangerous.
Thank you so much. These are, yeah, we definitely feel the challenges that are occurring here. Now, actually, I would love to build off, I apologize. I know my cat is very distracted. She's a senior elder here who just really thinks that she needs to be in everything right now. So what I would love to ask are questions around this, considering something Eva had said, that we both recognize the struggles that women are facing within this current moment in time, but that the resilience and the power that we're able to bring, the hopeful things that we're able to bring. So as we're looking at the gaps that are happening and the ways we're having to find new ways of being in society, what are some areas of hope that we believe that we can tap into right now? Perhaps different ways that we're functioning, making changes within our workplaces, perhaps social systems that have modified in order to be able to try and do better than we were, that have been pointed out right now. And I'd love, if anyone has thoughts on that, I'd love to hear your considerations.
I'll go first this time. I mentioned this a little bit in my intro, but I think people's sort of common sense, sort of baseline understanding about how critical those and entwined those caregiving roles, both that people are doing themselves at home, and that they were relying on paying other people to do, and now are struggling to have that, how critical those actually are to our economy. So I do think there is this moment that is special now, where people are thinking much more holistically about the role of unpaid and paid caregiving in our economy, and that does give me hope for what can come out of it in terms of the political sense, and also like the bigger picture, like I think more people are coming out of this crisis being like, you know what, everybody should have healthcare. It's just insane that it's possible to get sick from this virus that anyone can give you and everyone is susceptible to, and not everyone has healthcare, right? I think more people are coming out of this crisis being like, it's insane that you can't get childcare in order to be able to work. So I do think people's common sense is shifting, and that creates some opportunities here that give me hope.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Please, Eva.
So I'll go back to the narrative because I think it's extremely important. And as we as a country are facing a new chapter of hope, with the first woman, first person of color, first new American being the vice president of the United States, I think that opens up the chapter of reimagining the role of women. And I think the narrative to tell the story and the powerful narrative that we can build together will push the policies forward. And also keeping in mind that, half of the country voted for the status quo. And 34% of the voters in Massachusetts voted for the status quo. What does that mean? So I think it's extremely important that we work together to build a very strong narrative that women are part of the solution and women are the backbone of our economy. That narrative and then that strong story really will push the policies and practices forward for more inclusive and better, better rights for women, including, the foreign-born women.
So I think there are a number of things that are hopeful. I think we have seen that government supports, well, first of all, we've seen that the federal government can invest a lot of things and things they've been saying for a long time they couldn't invest in. They gave everybody $1,200, right? They did UI, unemployment insurance bumps for everybody. And what we've seen from that is that surprise, surprise, when people have a bump in their income, they're better able to support their families. So now the question is, how do we use that example to say that the wages people need to be making is that higher bump, right? And so we're working on trying to tell that story. But I think we have seen that, the first federal paid leave policy, flawed, but has been enacted. And so there's a new consciousness of caregiving, right? Why? I would argue because the men have had to stay home in their houses and with their children and have had to hear them and realize that it's impossible to work when you've got children screaming and running around and not doing their schoolwork on time. At least that's what's happening in my house. So I think those are a good acknowledgement. We've seen the business community talking more about childcare policy and paid leave policies than they ever have before. We've seen the essential worker conversation really highlighting that grocery store workers and CNAs and home care workers are a necessary part of all of our lives, and we couldn't all function without them. And why are they making the least amount of wages in the country? And then the other thing is taxes. In Rhode Island, we have been talking a long time about the upside down tax code and how the lowest wage workers, if you added all of their taxes together, are paying a higher percentage of their wages and taxes than the highest income folks. And that has now, I think there's a new recognition that people are now ready to say that that is not fair, and that the highest folks among us who are able to work from home, who are not doing those essential worker jobs, should be able to pay more in taxes in order to support the programs that keep the economy afloat.
Thank you for that, Rachel. So we're talking quite a bit about the disparities, and we are speaking of them in a way that is aspirational and hopeful, that we're going to try to find ways to build these gaps. But one of the things that's striking me in this moment, it happened in the earlier comments following the keynote from Representative Presley, thinking about that we are very much in both a racially charged and an increasingly violent time. And people who are wearing their identities cannot hide their identities, when we are thinking about what this means for BIPOC women, being in the workforce or having social supports has always been a weapon. It's been weaponized against populations of individuals and of groups of women. And of course, absolutely within our migrant and our refugee communities, right? Because we're not fitting within the narrative of the bootstraps piece. And so the conversations continually shift back towards a return to xenophobia and a return to racism and a return to bigotry as ways of forcing women out of the workforce and by minimizing the gains or reductions of the gains. And I've seen some studies that have been talking about that we're looking at going backwards, sometimes up to 5 to 10 years on some of the progress that we've made through our economic structures to be able to lift women in a more meaningful way. And I would appreciate, an opportunity to have a little bit of a candid talk about that, what that feels like, what that's embodied, and how that moves, shifts, or marginalized most impacted women within our workforce right now, especially under a COVID crisis. Everything wants me today. Would anyone be willing to share their thoughts on that? And then we'll start taking some questions from the audience in just a moment.
I don't know that I have anything super smart to say about that, but I think you're right that so first of all, the physical toll of all of the injustice and oppression that women of color in particular, and people of color more generally are living with was significant before this. And I think, that's probably not an insignificant part of why the virus itself is taking a greater toll on those communities, right? Like, it's hard. This is a country that's like unhealthy and dangerous for BIPOC folks, and was before this. And I think that exacerbates this crisis for real. I do think there is a moment, or there has been this year, where a whole new group of people, pretty imperfectly and clumsily, and sometimes doing some harm as they try, are thinking about some of the ways in which this country is dangerous for Black folks in particular. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's just been an incredible shift to watch, the sort of uprisings of this year in defense of Black life, and the way that has shifted so many things, and also the backlash to it, right? Like, every advance we see on racial equality also has a piece of backlash, but I suspect more advance than backlash. Although I said to someone earlier this year that I think new things are possible around race and racism in this moment, in both directions. Things that seemed unattainable as advances seem maybe attainable, and things that seemed impossible in terms of like white supremacist violence, or like out of the sort of norm, suddenly seem inside it again. So yeah, it's a moment of tremendous uncertainty, and the stress that adds to BIPOC women is super real. I don't know that I have a great solution.
Well said, Georgia. I'll go next. Another point I wanted to bring to this discussion is that, yes, women are at disadvantage, and there are uncertainties in this very challenging time. And I wanted to add that immigration status, it's another major barrier for women, and especially for foreign-born women. And as we talk about, the need for an immigration reform that brings the families together and it meets the needs of our economy, we have to talk about women and how women are impacted by this. So there is no economic recovery without also a reform of our immigration laws and policies that include women. How many people are living in limbo time, including women. We have women of temporary protected status from the Haitian community, from the El Salvadorian community, from Nicaraguan and other places. El Salvadorian women have been here for over 20 years. They still don't have a green card. They're at the risk of their status being ended and they're being deported. The same thing with Dreamer and so many young women who have proven to be stories of success. DACA that was created by President Obama was ended by the current president, and it's still in limbo. It's another big piece of how do we talk about women who have a limbo status and need to have that safety and that security. So I think in light of many uncertainties, immigration status and the reimagining of the 21st century immigration policy that helps and include immigrant women, it's also a big and important part of our conversation as we do intersectional work and we talk about women as a very strong part of our economy. So as we talk about solutions and as we talk about uncertainties, as we talk about policy implications, keep in mind that without a 21st century modern immigration policy, immigrant and refugee women in particular won't be able to be fully participants in our economy.
I think I'd also like to add how to be thoughtful around making sure there are diverse people and ideas and communities at the table of decision making, and at the same time recognizing the unbelievable stress of those communities are facing. You know, I think about a conversation we had with a grassroots group here in Rhode Island, you know, and asking how, you know, what is the best way to engage that community in the policy conversations, the love language that we have, that Rep. Presley has. You know, and the response is right now, people are under such extreme stress around just trying to self-care and pay their rent and take care of their families. And so how do you balance that stress and also be sure that those voices are at the table in a real way? And I don't have a good answer to that. I mean, I think it's a very long-term process of doing that, but in this urgent moment, I think it's so important to do the story collection in an authentic way, but not take advantage of those folks who we know are already balancing so much at this moment.
Thank you all. So we are going to switch over a little bit to taking questions from the audience. I do want to encourage as well as as we're thinking about policy opportunities that we should build in a jobs guarantee. So if it's an immigration policy, if it's a food systems policy, if it's any sort of policy that's meant to lift up working women, that we need to ensure that there's a jobs guarantee in there that's meaningful and will actually do what we need it to do, so that will come out whole. So thank you for that. So I did see a hand raised first. I saw Tess Brown. Would you, you can either place your question in the chat, or if you want to turn on your video, you're welcome to do so.
Sorry, I thought the video was on. Good morning. Thank you. Excellent panel. Really appreciate, and thank you so much, Kiah, how you framed the whole thing, and all panelists. Just really appreciate. So just briefly, just want to include a couple of things. So if anybody has had breakfast or eaten recently, so I got an egg and I have an apple, and they connect here to Massachusetts. Our poultry farms, our apple farms, where they had an oak break in Vermont. But just as we are continuing our discussion, we're speaking about women and marginal and being hidden. So I just want to somehow, as we go through and as we think beyond today, who picks the food we eat? We can't forget the farm workers, many of whom many are immigrants, some are undocumented, and as even the others have pointed out, you know, what they're up against. So I just wanted to bring this into our conversation. Where I'm coming from is, for full disclosure, I'm a Roman Catholic nun, I'm a community organizer, worked with the farm workers for 9 years as staff persons in different capacities, and have been on and off with the National Farm Worker Ministry Board. So very dear to my heart, and you see I have Dolores back here. So somehow, as we continue this work, she's a woman, and the other women who are balancing so many of the things the panelists have said. Just want to interject that as we go forward, not to forget this very, very hidden group, along with our grocery store workers, but not to forget the people who pick the food we eat. And as long as, and Dolores used to say, as long as we eat, we are involved in the farm workers' struggle. So let's please remember. Thank you.
Just want to add something to that on a policy perspective. I love the props, and the point is very important as well. We often talk about, we talk a lot about minimum wage, and people are sort of very focused on that number going up. And we've had some real gains around that in lots of the states in New England. And, it's a bit of a patchwork, but there's some good movement there. But the other thing I think we always need to be thinking about is are the holes in the minimum wage rules in different states. So in lots of states, agricultural and farm workers, actually, you're not required to pay them the minimum wage. You're allowed to pay them less. And the same is true in many places for domestic workers. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how that happened, right? Like, those are the jobs that historically, when minimum wage laws were, when minimum wage laws were first written, were predominantly done by people of color. And so they were basically written out, right? Like, minimum wage laws were essentially written to protect white workers. And as we are now, minimum wage workers are disproportionately people of color in the service sector, but there are still those holes in lots of places for domestic workers and agricultural workers. So as we think about minimum wage policy, one of the things we should be thinking about is making sure that's really a floor that's lifting everyone up. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention service workers and tipped employees. So almost every state in New England, I think, has a lower minimum wage for people who are serving you at restaurants, also disproportionately women and people of color.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that. There is a conversation that's happening in the chat, and I will get to the next question hand raised. If you do not know how to raise your hand, if you look at your name under the participants, there should be a place on there that you can click on to say you want to raise your hand to ask, or you can put your question in the chat as well. So thank you for that. But yes, that conversation around minimum wage, I like to say dignified wage. I think we need to move from minimum to livable to a dignified wage. So that's just my putting on my little soapbox there. So these are great questions. So I see next on the list, I have a Phyllis Smith.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. It's been very insightful. A few things that I wrote down because I thought we might have a breakout session. I come from more of the for-profit corporate sector. I'm currently a commissioner on the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. I live in Franklin, Mass. And Eva, we have worked with, I'm actually elected in my town as a part of one of our town committees, and we have worked with Mira because in my town, which is about 95+% white, we do have immigrants in this town as well as a few people are BIPOC and women of color. And so I'm very much familiar with your organization and appreciate the work that you're doing. I had two thoughts. One question, actually want to find out more about how we as a commission can work with you around these issues. I heard that someone had mentioned driving women's legislation. I wanted to know if you could possibly drop the number of the bill or in the chat, or if there are any other legislative or policy that you would like support. It'd be great if you could share that with us. Because we're definitely interested in amplifying those issues and supporting those. The other thing is I thought two things. I just want to throw them out because I do come from more of the for-profit sector. Is Kiah, related to your story, in regard to having at one point to depend on public service, a public, from food stamps to Section 8 housing and things when I was raising my children as a single parent. But after having an opportunity to advance my education, I was able to bring myself out of that. So I wanted to bring that into the discussion. Two things. One is entrepreneurship. We're finding large percentages of women of color are starting to look at entrepreneurship as an opportunity. The other is opportunities for retraining. My grandmother was a domestic. At the time, living in the South, that was the only type of job she could get. But later she was able to get another type of work and purchase a home. And so I'm just wondering, are we looking at options for retraining, education? Because those we know are a vehicle to be able to bring people out of poverty. So yes, we want to be able to provide people with a living wage, but let's just be frank, some of these jobs are never coming back. So I think it's how are we going to pivot from, some of these jobs so that we can get people into better opportunities, educate them. So I just wanted to bring those two things into the discussion because sometimes we don't talk about those. And I think those are some options too. So thank you again for giving me the time and space to speak and share that information.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. And I would love to allow for any of our panelists if they want to talk about that. I did want to bring into the orbit. So within my role within Rights and Democracy, we cover both New Hampshire and Vermont. And we're part of a New England coalition called the Renew Alliance, which is looking at, it's based off of the work of what you've seen both in the Thrive resolution and within the Green New Deal framework that's really trying to address our multiple crises that we have happening right now across New England. And it is a concerted effort of multiple platforms that are going to be shared across all of New England states. They're all in it. And there's over 150 organizations that are part of this coalition right now and are working on policies that are trying to do exactly what you just mentioned. So I greatly appreciate you bringing that forward, Palma. So I would encourage you all to take a look at that. I can throw that in the chat as well, but I'd love to hear as well from our panelists or from others if you have specific things you'd like to raise up. You can also place them in the chat if you have links to work that you are doing right now so that we can share those resources with each other. Did anyone want to respond to Palma?
Very briefly, Phyllis, thank you so much for your amazing work and thank you for your comments and your kindness as well. So two things in terms of the bills, and I'll throw them in the chat also, but you can go on the website, miracoalition.org, www.miracoalition.org. We are also a coalition of institutions, and both bills, the Safe Communities Coalition and the Driving Families Forward coalition, our coalition immigrant-led with over 230 members, bigger than the MIRA coalition itself. So we are coalitions of coalitions. And there is hard work being done on both these very important pieces of legislations to help immigrants and refugees, generally speaking, but immigrant women. And by supporting these two bills, you support, the well-being of everyone, because safety and security and the ability to drive and everybody being an insured driver and a safe driver and license, it's common sense. So that's one thing. The second one was to your point about, education and trainings. Massachusetts has been a leader in the country, and education and training programs have been available. But if we can make those more inclusive and be more strategic in terms of how do specific policies and language really make those dollars well spent in a strategic way to really help women in particular. And one thing I wanted to say is this is the New England Conference, maybe one of the action steps for all of us is to really come up with an idea of the New England Women for All Women Coalition, so we can really have a way to empower women and have the voices of all women telling that powerful story. I think stories move stones. And I think, working together on a narrative, women for women speaking with one powerful voice, I think that would be a great next step for this after this convening.
And I'd just briefly say, thank you, Phyllis, for your question. I think on the training point that you make is so important. And what we're seeing in Rhode Island is that the government is focusing on retraining, but for higher skill jobs. And so we think it's really important to remind the state that they need to continue to invest in just the adult basic ed services, making sure everybody has the English language skills that they need. The state has not been very good about investing in those, thinking about the ESOL in the schools so that, we don't just focus on retraining the higher skilled jobs. The other point to just make is thinking about the technology that's available. I think there's a lot of focus on making sure people have high speed internet, but is that on their phones? Is it on their computers? Do they have the computer skills they need to live in the Zoom world that we're living in now? Can they do the schooling, the higher ed and training pieces from their home? And I think those are some of the gaps that are being left out in those conversations right now.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. And I apologize, Phyllis, for calling you Paloma. Thank you so much for your question. I'm like trying to go with the notes and I'm trying here. I appreciate you. So I have next a Giovanna. Are you still with us, Giovanna?
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute.
Oh, no.
Thank you, everyone, for putting this together. This has been really very powerful for me. I work in a parent-child center in Norwich, Vermont. And as many of you may know, there is a network of parent-child centers all over Vermont, and we work with families primarily who are struggling in a lot of ways. And we provide many, many services. I teach in a high school completion program there and administer that program. Our client base is almost as white as our organization and the majority of our community. And we are very actively engaged in trying to change that through organizational behavior change and various other community building efforts. And I'm just wondering if folks have, our executive director works at the policy level. We are sometimes, others of us are engaged in that at that level. And I'm wondering if people have wise words or examples or resources to offer specifically around the work of parent-child centers reaching and meeting the needs of especially BIPOC here in the upper Connecticut River Valley. I don't know if I have anything else. Yeah.
So your greatest challenge in thinking about parent-child centers, the parent-child centers as a model are really, really powerful, and being able to provide that. I know many of our parent-child centers throughout the state, some of them are specifically focused on helping teenage mothers who now sometimes have multiple generations of families that are within the same parent-child centers, and being able to help support those variety of needs to just keep people whole. Yeah, so looking at some specific funding structures, I'm glad that you brought that forward. And I think that, again, anything that's going to be coming forth as a solution should probably have some very specific solutions to try to help those programs which are needed not go under because of the financial crisis that we're within right now and be one of the first ones to get cut. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. And definitely if folks have thoughts, or please help collaborate, feel free to reach out. You can direct message here.
I mean, I know that not a lot of people don't know the breadth of what centers like this do, but
Yes.
I'm there, I'm connected, I'm working in the community. So please reach out to me if you would like to help me think about this or have any ideas. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So up next, I have Lydia McIntosh, maybe?
Yes, it is Macintosh. Thank you for pronouncing it correctly. It's just like the apple. I just wanted to bring awareness. First of all, I want to say this conference is great. I've been with this conference. I've attended since 2014, the first conference year, and I always love it. But one thing I wanted to do is bring awareness to the seniors. There's not a lot of talk surrounding seniors who are participating in the political world, and also we're discussing right now the workforce. And we seem to be left out a lot of times. So I just want to bring awareness to that because I'm a senior, I'm over 65. And I was working before the pandemic as a substitute teacher, which I enjoyed very much. It didn't pay much, but that was not my main concern. My main concern was to be part of the workforce and to contribute to society. And I felt that I had an identity, and I felt like I was contributing to working with students. So when their teacher was out, that I was able to provide the continuity of their education. And I felt like I made a difference in some cases with some kids, even though it's not a regular teacher, that I could contribute to society and to the education of children, which is very important to me. So of course, since the pandemic, I cannot work because first of all, the schools were closed. And even though I believe my district that I was working in is still doing virtual learning, so I could not work. I still can't work because number one, I'm in a vulnerable category as far as I have underlying medical conditions and plus my age. So I cannot go back into the workforce right now. But I don't know when the pandemic is over if I'm going to be able to return to the workforce, because it may be difficult to want to hire someone that may be closer to 70 years old, or they may say, well, you have these underlying conditions, we don't want you in the workforce right now because you're just a liability. And so, so even though I think the priority is, as far as our discussion goes, is parents, trying to support children and feeding their children and paying their rent. That's very important to make sure they have what they call, as you said, dignified wages. And that's very important. And I think that should be a priority. But I think we should also consider the, older generation who can still work and still contribute. So that's all I wanted to say for now.
Linda, not to mention actually that older generation are also critical in sort of family caregiving roles in right. Lots of families, and especially in communities of color. And this pandemic is especially isolating to them. And also because people are like trying to protect their grandmas or whatever, they're right. losing some childcare. This is true in my family. We still have our paid childcare, but the childcare that we've lost in this pandemic is the childcare provided by my mom, because we want to be careful about her and her underlying conditions. So it's tremendously hard on her, is a big part of like,
right.
And then also tremendously hard on us. So like that, you're right, we have missed talking about it, but that is very much the part of the ecosystem of a lot of families and a lot of communities, is the work, both paid and unpaid caregiving work that older folks do.
I did have, my mother passed away almost 2 years ago, but I have been thinking since the pandemic, if my mother was still alive, she was 96 when she passed away, that I would be worrying about that, and that would be a big issue. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, that my mother's not here, because I don't have to worry about that, because I know it would be, like you said, a tremendous responsibility if my mother was still alive. So I understand that there's plenty of people around that still have their parents or grandparents around. Fortunately, I don't have children, I don't have grandchildren, and I don't have my parents around or elderly people. So for me personally, I don't have that issue right now, but I understand it exists. And we, like you said, we need to consider that as well. So, but I think I find that a lot of these workshops or seminars or conferences I've attended on similar topics, I think that the seniors are usually kind of left out. And we talk about the young, and like even here in this conference, which is important, don't get me wrong. I think it's important for the young voices, new voices, but I got a degree in, I got my master's in public policy in 2015. And I thought that I would be able to get in, that's why I'm in this conference, because I thought that I could contribute in the political sphere. And I haven't been able to get into the public policy. And I have now this huge loan that I got to pay back, and not having a job, pay back this loan. And, and I'm trying to get, but I feel like there's a block there or a constraint because I'm over 65. So, I don't sometimes feel like I don't get enough support as a senior, and I still feel young enough and I still feel I can contribute. I may be 67 years old, but I feel like, I'm like 40 or 50 years old and I can still do stuff, with some limitations. My body is getting older, but still I feel vibrant enough that I want to contribute to,
and Lydia, I am so grateful that you lifted this voice. And honestly, the way that we should be functioning as a society, and when we're thinking about what a jobs guarantee means for anyone who wants to work should be able to work. It shouldn't matter which
Right.
age
I
you're
agree.
at. If you want to continue to be in the workforce and that is something that is giving you
Right.
joy, it should be able to give you joy. It should be a choice, and it should
Right.
not be something that you have to do in order to survive. So
Right.
this is how our capitalistic system has really minimized the dreams and the hopes of so many right now. But we are also seeing seniors returning to the workforce in ways that we would not have expected during this time, and placing themselves at risk just to survive. So thank you so, so much. And thank you for everything that you do. So we are at time, and I'm so sorry. I do see some more hands in the chat, and I wish that we had an opportunity to get there. I would love to ask for you to, if you can, throw your praises, your likes, your snaps, your claps in that chat. Let our panelists know how you felt about this session. Please continue to support the incredible work of everybody that's here on these calls. Stay in touch, stay in community. We have so much work to do, but we also have to rest. We have much to look forward to and so much to enjoy. I'm grateful to have been able to have shared this space with each and every one of you today. I want to thank the conference for pulling us together. I want to thank our incredible panelists that we've had with us today. I want to thank my cat for bringing some levity into all of this. And I want to thank you for staying in this work. Everyone, have an incredible day. Stay safe, stay healthy, be well,